Imagine being stopped by officers who think they can bend the rules to their will. In today's story, we meet a group of calm yet confident men who refuse to back down, standing firm on their rights in the face of authority. What begins as a routine encounter quickly escalates when these officers realize their usual tactics won't work here. The men, armed with knowledge and composure, challenge every demand with unwavering conviction, leaving the cops scrambling to justify their actions. As tensions rise, it's not just about knowing the law. It's about proving who's really in control. You'll witness moments that leave you questioning the limits of power and the importance of standing up for yourself. Will the officers back off, or will this confrontation take an unexpected turn? Stay tuned, because this one's bound to keep you on the edge of your seat. The scene unfolds in a quiet parking lot, where a couple of friends are wrapping up their day. Out of nowhere, a patrol car pulls up, and two officers step out, their presence immediately commanding attention. At first, it seems like a routine check, just a simple ID request. But something about their tone feels off, almost as if they're fishing for trouble. The men remain calm, politely asking why they're being stopped. Instead of a clear answer, the officers grow more assertive, pushing for compliance without explanation. What the officers don't expect, however, is the sharp knowledge these men possess. They quote laws, ask for badge numbers, and calmly remind the officers of their rights. The power dynamic starts to shift as the officers realize their intimidation tactics are falling flat. Frustration begins to show, but they aren't backing off just yet. The standoff grows more intense. What's going to happen next? As the officers press on, one of the men calmly reminds them that without reasonable suspicion, they aren't required to show ID. His voice is steady, yet firm, as he cites specific legal precedents, leaving the officers momentarily stunned. But instead of backing off, the tension only escalates. One officer, visibly irritated, tries to change the angle, demanding to know why the men are acting suspicious. The men exchange a quick glance, clearly unfazed, and one of them responds with a measured question. What law have we broken? Nearby, a small crowd begins to gather, sensing that something unusual is unfolding. Among the onlookers, you can hear faint murmurs of curiosity and support. The officers shift uncomfortably, knowing they're being watched. Despite their attempts to regain control, it becomes clear that their authority is being challenged, and not just by words. The balance of power is shifting, and the standoff only grows more intense. The officers, now visibly frustrated, exchange tense glances, realizing their authority is being openly questioned. One of them steps closer, trying to assert dominance, but the men don't flinch. Instead, one calmly pulls out his phone and begins recording. For everyone's safety, he says, his tone even and controlled. The officers hesitate for a moment, clearly aware that the growing crowd and now the camera have shifted the dynamic further out of their favor. But instead of de-escalating, one officer doubles down, raising his voice and insisting they comply immediately. The men stand their ground, asking once again for clarification on what law they've broken. The tension is palpable, every second feeling heavier than the last. The onlookers grow quiet, all eyes fixed on what seems like an inevitable breaking point. Will the officers back down, or will they take this to the next level? The atmosphere is electric with suspense. Just as the tension seems like it's about to reach its peak, another officer arrives on the scene. Unlike the first two, this one appears more composed, taking a moment to assess the situation before stepping in. He pulls the initial officers aside for a quiet conversation, but their body language suggests things are far from resolved. Meanwhile, the men continue recording, their confidence unwavering as they patiently wait for an explanation. The crowd watches in silence, the sense of anticipation growing thicker with each passing second. Suddenly, one of the original officers breaks away from the group and returns, his tone sharper than before. "If you're not going to cooperate, we'll take this further," he threatens. But before he can act, one of the men calmly presents a printed document, a copy of the very law they've been referencing. The officer pauses, visibly caught off guard. The crowd shifts, murmurs breaking out as the power dynamic shifts yet again. What started as a simple ID request has now spiraled into a full-blown test of authority, and no one knows what will happen next. The lead officer takes the document, his expression a mix of irritation and disbelief. He scans the page while the crowd watches intently, their phones now out and recording. The tension is thick as he turns to his colleague, muttering something under his breath. For a moment, it seems like the officers might double down, but then the newly arrived officer steps forward, signaling for everyone to calm down. He looks directly at the men, his tone measured. "You're free to go," he says reluctantly, handing back the document. The crowd erupts in quiet applause and murmurs of approval, but just as the men prepare to leave, the lead officer can't resist one last dig. "Next time, don't make this harder than it has to be," he sneers. One of the men turns back, his voice steady yet firm. "Next time, know the law before you try to enforce it." With that, they walk away, leaving the officers visibly rattled, and the crowd energized by what they just witnessed. But as the camera pans back, the men notice something odd. A small, unmarked car parked nearby with someone inside, watching the entire interaction. Who are they? And what does this mean? The story may be over, but the mystery has only deepened. As the men walk away, they exchange a quiet laugh, relieved but also proud of how they stood their ground. They know they didn't just defend their own rights. They showed everyone watching that knowledge is power. The crowd slowly disperses, some nodding in admiration, others still murmuring about the unmarked car. The officers remain by their patrol cars, clearly unsettled by how the encounter unfolded, but there's no denying they've been outmatched this time. Later, as the men drive away, they reflect on the strange presence of the unmarked car. Probably someone making sure the law was followed. One of them says with a grin, though none of them are entirely sure. What matters most to them is the lesson they leave behind. Always stay calm, know your rights, and don't let intimidation cloud your judgment. With the tension behind them, they head off, ready to take on whatever comes next.